So thanks again for coming from lunch to this very special session. I'm not surprised we've got pretty much a full house here because obviously we're going to be focusing now on Canada's new infrastructure frontier. And I'm very pleased that Denton's has kindly stepped up to the plate to sponsor this afternoon's program. And so I'm pleased to have Michael Leggett with us. Some of you may know Michael. He's co-chair of Denton's infrastructure and P3 practice. And most important to me, he's a member of my board of directors. So please join me in welcoming Michael Denton. Sorry, Michael Denton. That's good. Yeah, really good, isn't it? Let's welcome Michael Leggett, right? Who's from Brent. There you go. Have fun, man.
Thanks, Mark, I think. So Denton's is pleased to be the afternoon Day 2 presenting sponsor. Denton's is the world's largest law firm with over 150 locations in over 60 countries. Our infrastructure practice undertakes public infrastructure projects for public and private sector clients in Canada and the United States, as well as Central and South America, Africa, Asia, Australia, Europe, and the Middle East. So the theme of this afternoon is Canada's new infrastructure frontier. With 25 years of P3 success in Canada, we have much to be proud of. Over 260 projects with a value of over $120 billion for those projects that have reached financial close. P3s have saved Canadians as much as $27 billion. While the first 25 years of P3s focused largely on availability-based arrangements, the next generation of projects promises to add a new class of projects to the P3 sector in Canada. The federal government has announced the creation of the Canada Infrastructure Bank, which will focus on revenue-generating projects with an eye to transfer of revenue risk. We're pleased this afternoon to hear a keynote from Inaugural Chair of the bank, Janice Fukakusa, who will give us more details on the status of the bank and its promise for the future. Her speech will be followed by a session with an impressive panel of experts who will dive into some of the key policy and mechanical issues that will be important for the bank and to get it right as it gets up and running. We believe, if properly structured, the bank has a real opportunity to expand the P3 sector in Canada and ultimately bring more infrastructure to Canadians. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Thank you very much. That's great. I'd also take a moment to welcome Minister Sohi back. Thank you very much, Minister, for coming this afternoon, and thank you again this morning. And particularly thank you again for tweeting out the opening of the TSX stock exchange, because it jumped up our impressions by 1 million. You really are a man of influence. I'm very impressed. I'm now pleased to introduce Ruth McMorrow, who's Executive Vice President of Parsons, who will introduce our keynote speaker, Janice Fukakusa.
Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Parsons, a global infrastructure delivery firm, I am pleased to have the honor to introduce Janice Fukakusa, who will be leading the Canadian Infrastructure Bank. Ms. Fukakusa, will provide her unique perspective on the opportunities to create a robust environment that supports the development of transformational infrastructure across Canada. That will include a discussion on how best to increase the velocity of private sector investment into large, complex, revenue-generating projects. Janice Fukakusa, retired as RBC's Chief Administrative Officer and Chief Financial Officer in January of 2017, and she currently serves on the board of a number of corporate and not-for-profit organizations, including Cineplex, the Princess Margaret Cancer Foundation, and is chair of the board of the governors of Ryerson University. In 2016, she was named one of the 25 most powerful women in banking by American Banker magazine for the 4th year in a row. She was earlier this year in July appointed the inaugural chair of the Canadian Infrastructure Bank. Please join me in welcoming Janice Fukakusa to the stage.
Just say Janice. It's okay. Don't worry about it. Thank you, Ruth, for that very kind introduction. And thanks to you, Mark, for inviting me to join everyone at this fabulous conference. Before I begin, I'd like to congratulate the Council on this 25th anniversary event. What great representation you have here from across Canada and around the world. And I think it really speaks to your position as the preeminent forum for innovative ideas about infrastructure partnerships. So it's a real pleasure to be with you today. As inaugural chair of the Canada Infrastructure Bank, I want to update you on our progress on the bank. I'll also discuss how our new model will transform the way infrastructure is planned, funded, and delivered. I realize that some of you don't know me, so I'd like to start with some thoughts on why I'm here, what brings me here, and why I got involved. In my career, I spent many years in wholesale banking, and I worked closely with institutional and corporate investors to structure large financing deals. As a bank executive, I worked extensively with different regulators and governments in Canada and around the world. And I can attest firsthand to the importance of partnerships because they were absolutely critical during the financial crisis. Our banks, governments, federal agencies, and private sectors had to come together quickly to find solutions that would ensure the financial stability of Canada. We succeeded, thank goodness, because of our ability to collaborate. I expect to draw on all of these experiences as chair of Canada's Infrastructure Bank. It's an energizing role, as our new organization is also coming together with a variety of stakeholders to find solutions to a pressing national challenge. As you know, Canada, like other countries, faces a large infrastructure gap, estimated to be in the hundreds of billions of dollars. This gap hinders our productivity and our collective prosperity. The Government of Canada has committed to significant long-term investments in infrastructure. Likewise, provinces, territories, and municipalities have also pledged considerable support. But governments cannot build and fund all the infrastructure we need using public sector balance sheets alone. It's just not sustainable. At the same time, sources of private and institutional capital are available to help close the gap in financing new greenfield infrastructure, if there are new ways to share the risks and rewards. Working closely with the private sector in all facets of project planning, development, and execution can bring efficiencies and more innovation into public infrastructure. We've seen many successes already in various P3 models, and there's an opportunity to go even further, to bring investors, developers, and governments together to advance projects that might not otherwise go forward. With new mechanisms, we can get more infrastructure built for Canadians and also free up public sector resources for other priority investments. The Canada Infrastructure Bank, or CIB, represents that new model. We aim to attract private investment and expertise to priority revenue-generating projects that might not otherwise be commercially viable. In other words, the CIB will complement existing models, such as P3s and traditional government funding. It's also important to note that we will not compete for private sector investment where it already exists. The bank is a new Crown corporation, soon to be operational, so I want to be clear on specific governance responsibilities. We will conduct our work at arm's length from the government. Now, what exactly does that mean? The federal government sets the overall policy direction and the high-level infrastructure priorities. That's the framework in which we operate. The government has already identified some priorities, such as public transit, trade and transportation, and green infrastructure. We at the bank have independence to operate as a counterparty to private investors. We have independence to conduct due diligence, to determine which projects meet bankable criteria, and to structure, negotiate, and execute the projects. We are very close to putting in place our professional board of directors, which is independent. I'm pleased to say that there were exceptionally qualified candidates from across Canada and beyond. We're fortunate to be drawing on a very diverse pool of senior business and community leaders. These are experienced directors who are very well versed in infrastructure, portfolio management, finance, risk management, and corporate governance. And they bring their views and experiences from across the country and globally. We will carry out the functions typical of a corporate board, overseeing the organization's strategy, objectives, performance, and risk management. The CIB will structure, negotiate, and provide federal support for projects in whatever form is best for a given project. Since we are investing public dollars, the CIB is accountable to Parliament through our designated Cabinet Minister, Minister of Infrastructure and Communities, Amarjeet Sohi, who is in the audience and spoke earlier at a panel this morning. The government will approve our corporate plan and budgets, and this is standard for all Crown corporations. And within our mandate, the CIB has 3 key roles, and they are all interrelated. The first is to make and manage investments in revenue-generating infrastructure in the public interest. The second is to develop a center of expertise in these types of projects to support all levels of government. And the third is to collect and share Canadian infrastructure data to enable better informed decisions. I'll speak briefly about each of these. Making prudent, viable investments that support infrastructure across the country is mission critical for us. The CIB will invest $35 billion over the next 11 years in projects that are in the public interest and generate revenue. Keep in mind that revenue can come from in many different forms, including fees, tolls, fares, tariffs, and mechanism based on appreciating land values. Many governments in Canada already are exploring or have experience with user pricing of infrastructure. As all of you know, user pricing not only helps to fund construction and operation of an asset, it also contributes to efficient usage. We aim to attract private sector and institutional investors into projects they would traditionally find challenging. These investors will take on additional risk related to demand or revenue. This will provide extra incentive for private sector partners to ensure a project is well managed with the benefit of private sector expertise and discipline. Our investments also have to be in the public interest. Therefore, they will reflect the priorities of the Canadian government and other public sector sponsors. These sponsors are municipal, provincial, territorial, or Indigenous governments that bring forward projects for our consideration. These are the bank's real clients. We will work with sponsors in the early stages of proposed projects to help assess revenue models and financial structures and financeability. We're also open to working with the private sector in unsolicited proposals, which should generate even more innovation and creative ideas to address our long-term needs. Another important role for the bank is to provide expert advice to governments on all types of revenue-generating infrastructure. We will share best practices and advise on the project's potential for revenue generation and financial structuring. And our last part of our mandate, as you probably know, detailed data sets about infrastructure projects in Canada are not always readily available or standardized. Yet access to comprehensive data supports transparency and is essential for timely decision-making. We will work within our mandate with various governments to collect and disseminate data so Canadians can be assured that infrastructure decisions are well-informed and based on evidence. Of course, you may have many, many more questions about how we're going to operate. I expect our Chief Executive Officer to be named soon, and once the management team is in place, we'll be able to share more information and discuss potential projects. But I can say this, the CIB will be transparent and accountable. and we will operate with integrity. We will work to establish strong relationships with our public and private partners, with local communities, and other stakeholders. The bank was just announced over a year ago. A lot has been accomplished in a short time, from outreach to passing legislation creating the bank to recruiting a chair and an independent board. We are putting the foundations in place. Now, I've been talking to many people in recent months, and I've had a chance to speak to some of you here in the room. And one question that keeps on popping up is, why, Janice, are you doing this? The simple reason is that being involved with the CIB is a rare opportunity to help shape the future of Canada. We often think about what's broken when we look at our infrastructure and how we can fix it. Instead, the bank's work can be groundbreaking with a more forward-looking approach to the needs of future generations. Let's not count on being lucky. Instead, let's determine together which projects will deliver the most significant long-term benefits and find creative ways to make them happen. You, everyone in the room, has an opportunity to shape this long-term transformation too. The bank is a partnership-based model. We will continue to reach out to you initially for your views and soon for your participation. With that, I look forward to our next panel discussion. Thank you.